Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I like to discuss the report that an internal UK government opinion seems to be that the Scottish Parliament could push another referendum on independence whenever it likes, although potentially with a few provisos. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So when the prospect of a second Scottish referendum on independence reared its head, I said multiple times that people seem to be taking it for granted that such a referendum had to be authorised by Westminster. No real idea why people assume that when, one, the Scotland Act is supposed to grant powers over purely Scottish affairs to Holyrood. Yes, there's a little exception which I'll talk about later. Secondly, it would be akin to the EU deciding that Westminster wasn't allowed to hold the Brexit referendum in 2016. And thirdly, no one's actually really tested this assertion in court. And it's the latter one that for me is where it's ultimately got to be decided. Politicians create laws, but their expertise in the law is variable. And by variable, what I actually mean is most of them can barely read English, let alone legalese. Yes, they have expert legal advice when drafting laws, but politics can sometimes proceed with a little bit too much haste, and recently has not been taking expert legal advice terribly seriously. Laws sometimes have unintended consequences, so you can't always be completely sure of the legal boundaries until they are tested in a constitutional court by senior and experienced judges. You know, the ones who really know their stuff. Just because the first referendum was created with Westminster's approval doesn't mean that approval was needed. Now, from a purely principled point of view, a moral point of view, if Scotland cannot decide something like this for itself, then the union itself is a sham. It's not actually a union, is it? Now, I don't believe that was ever the case, and it's certainly not intended to be the case. And it seems this is also not what the UK government believed, or believed at the time, at any rate, despite what the current government may be saying publicly. Now, I have to say, I came across this a couple of weeks ago, but then noticed there was apparently an embargo on reporting it in place until July the 21st. Well, we're past July the 21st, so I'm assuming it's all good to go now. So this is based on a UK government email written as Tony Blair's new government at the time, 1997, were publishing their devolution plans. The article in the Herald shows that Donald Dewar, who was Labour's Scottish secretary at the time, I think he went on to become First Minister, but he was of the view that the devolution plans meant that Holyrood would be able to have a referendum on anything it likes. And it also makes clear in the article that this isn't an expert legal opinion in itself. It doesn't prove anything as such. However, I would have a couple of thoughts about this. Firstly, as Dewar was not a legal expert, his degree was in history, I would find it odd that he would express a legal opinion without having received some proper legal advice, which would have been freely available to him. Bear in mind, this was a private statement, a private sentiment expressed. It wasn't something intended as part of a campaign to persuade people to vote for you. There was no suggestion that anyone was playing fast and loose with the truth. It was an honest opinion because it was expressed to people in the government, not intended for people outside of that circle. But the second thing that comes to mind is that this would suggest that the very people who drew up the plans for Scottish devolution fully intended that the Scottish Parliament would be able to issue referenda on matters, including on independence, from the UK. Now, that doesn't mean that the path to independence was intended to be smooth, or that it would be smooth, even if it turned out there was a majority in favour of it. Although this represented an opinion from a government minister who was driving Scottish devolution, that Holyrood would be able to issue a referendum on independence, Westminster does still have legislative control over matters pertaining to the union. Now, you can argue all sorts of things at this point. There's no point in me, not a legal expert, trying to go through the ifs and buts with a viewership that may contain only a small amount of legal expertise. How I would take it is as follows. There is a view here that Holyrood can issue a referendum on independence without the authority of Westminster. If they do that, and Nicola Sturgeon has said that she will by 2024 if Boris Johnson doesn't comply with her mandate, then the UK government, which may not even be headed up by Boris Johnson then, I certainly hope it isn't, has two choices. One, they can challenge the Scottish government in the Supreme Court. This is risky because it will then test the lay of the land. There will then be a definitive judgment. Now, let us consider the political ramifications for various outcomes without knowing which outcome would be more likely. So let's say that the Supreme Court rule that Holyrood cannot issue the referendum because it is on a matter pertaining to the union between Scotland and England. This would be to effectively rule that the people of Scotland do not have the right to self-determination. That would be a terrible realisation for a lot of people, and I would expect that actually, rather than scuppering independence, to power up the move for independence, especially outside of Scotland. It would clearly be a deeply unfair situation. But I'm not sure that that's the more likely verdict. So let us say instead that the Supreme Court rule that Holyrood can issue the referendum, no problem at all, but that it would only be for information and Westminster would have to provide the legal consent for independence to occur. Refer you to Schedule 5 of the Scotland Act 1998, which reserves matters pertaining to the union of the kingdoms of Scotland and England. Now, this outcome may not be the barrier to independence than some may think, because you may think, well, they'll issue the referendum and then the Conservatives will just go, well, sorry, we're the ones who are in control and we're saying no. Sturgeon would issue the referendum here. This would present another choice to the Conservatives. Do they dismiss it as a stunt and not engage in the campaign? In that case, they actually make it more likely that the vote will be for independence because they won't be fighting against it. Or do they openly fight against it and give credibility, the same credibility that they wish to starve this stunt of? That way, they have a much better chance of winning, but if they lose, it becomes really difficult then to call it a stunt and to deny the result because they engaged with the process. After all, not only would it be a clear democratic wish on a single issue from the Scottish people, but UK government would have engaged in it, giving it that credibility. The third possible outcome, I suppose, from a court case is that the Supreme Court says that Holyrood not only have the power to issue the referendum, but that if the result is for independence, Westminster cannot block that move. But again, this is where Schedule 5, I suppose, makes the second verdict more likely in many ways. But I'm not a legal expert, don't know. But then there's the second option. So Sturgeon issues a referendum. The government decide not to challenge it in the Supreme Court because they're not sure what the outcome will be and they don't like what the outcome could be. So then the Conservative government choose to risk everything by just decrying the poll as illegitimate, saying we're not even going to engage with it, it's absolutely ridiculous, pointing to the Schedule 5 of the Scotland Act and going, look, it's in our remit, you're just being silly here, but not actually legally challenging it. You know, they could just say, look, you know, Holyrood, they can issue this poll, there's nothing we can stop them doing that, they've got their own spending matters, but it's just a waste of money because it will have no legal effect. They could then not engage with the campaign, remove resources from the main camp. Actually, that might work either way, thinking about it. Might not be bad having the likes of Boris Johnson not on the Remain side. We certainly weren't helped by having David Cameron on the Remain side in 2016, were we? But for me, this will be a very politically thorny issue for the Conservatives in government. Because the more they engage with it, yes, the better their chances of preventing a win for independence, but the tougher the time they will have in blocking the result if it doesn't go their way. And there's more than a serious risk that it won't go their way. Of course, blocking the result is not going to be a long-term solution anyway, because if you think about a population faced with a binary decision like this, you can split voters into like 4 groups, can't you? There are those in favour, they'll vote in favour. There are those against, they'll vote against. There are those who aren't sure, who may not vote at all, and there are those that are not bothered, who may not vote at all. It's that not bothered group that can suddenly turn if you tell them their voice is being ignored. You know, there'll be a load of people who just don't think it really matters much whether Scotland is independent or part of the UK. Much like people didn't really think it would matter if the UK was in the EU or not. But you then tell them that actually we had this vote and a majority of people said they wanted to leave, but Westminster's blocking it. All of a sudden you go, hang on a minute, what do you mean blocking it? That's a bit tyrannical. I'm not in favour of that. You get behind the independence movement. I know I would. I mean, you would, wouldn't you? It's a simple reaction against oppression. And there we are. All very interesting, but just a case of waiting now. So Nicola Sturgeon seems to be quite shrewd, I have to say. I think she'll pick her moment. I know that there are those in the SNP, Ian Blackford very famously, who want this poll as quickly as possible. That's just careless. Why would you do that? The calls for independence are only going to get louder the longer Boris Johnson remains in power. You have to bear in mind that when a campaign is started, if there is a strong Remain group, they'll rein it back a little bit. They'll have an impact. Campaigning always has an impact. So you get the momentum in your way as much as possible first. And even if Boris Johnson was deposed, it's unlikely that support will decline much, if at all. Even when he's replaced, it may not accelerate to the point where it is now. Why not wait longer? And for a time when the Conservatives are under more pressure from elsewhere as well. There are other things coming up that are bound to have the Conservatives have their attention distracted. Wait for that time as well. But those are my thoughts anyway. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.